Morning, everybody. Canberra's all good to go? Great. The first principle of the immigration system of any country in the world, including Australia, is to be in a nation you should either be a citizen, be on a visa, or be eligible and applying for a visa. On coming to government, there were a large number of people who were in detention but could not effectively be removed. These individuals had failed the character test, and as a result of that, their visas had been cancelled. For various reasons, different for each person, they couldn't be returned to the country of their origin. So therefore, they were simply kept in indefinite detention. When the High Court brought down the NZYQ case, it made clear that, and set a new precedent, simply stating, without me giving a quick summary, the principle was to keep someone in detention in those circumstances, you could only do so if you had a genuine opportunity to remove them in the near future. When NZYQ came down, there was an immediate legislative response establishing new visa conditions and community safety orders. I've been asked many times by members of the gallery since I took on this portfolio as to how we're going in using those community safety orders to be able to launch an action for preventative detention. The threshold in that legislation, because of other constitutional precedents, is very, very high. And while, as I've continued to be briefed and continue to work with my department, there are no cases for preventative detention that are nearly ready to go. There may be some other community safety orders in terms of supervision orders that we're getting very close to being able to launch action on. But in the absence of that legislation, we have been left in a situation where, because of the NZYQ decision, these individuals who failed the character test, who are in a situation where in any other circumstance they'd be leaving the country, have been within the community. When the YBFZ decision came down, I introduced legislation to the Parliament. I was asked in question time at the time by the opposition as to why we weren't taking the action I described under the previous Act to get people into detention. And I made clear in response to the opposition that my priority wasn't to have them in detention, it's that they should leave the country. When people have come to your country and seriously broken the law, and as a result of breaking the law, an assessment is done as to whether or not they pass the character test, which assesses their criminal history and all the elements of their character. When they're found to not be eligible for a visa under Australian law, they should leave. It's not simply a case of the aim being to have them in detention, the aim is for them to not be in Australia. After I'd introduced that Migration Amendment Bill to the Parliament, the Government of Nauru approached Australia while the legislation was in Parliament with an interest in forming an arrangement with Australia where they would decide as a sovereign nation who they might want to issue a visa to. Yesterday, Nauru issued 3 30-year visas for members of this cohort. All 3 people are people who have failed the character test and as a result were on what's called a bridging visa R, a removal pending visa, a BVR. The issuing of those Nauruan visas immediately cancelled by law the visa that they were on, and as a result there was an obligation on my officials to take them into detention. Overnight, officers of the Australian Border Force have detained all 3, and all 3 are now in immigration detention. They will be put on a plane and sent to Nauru as soon as arrangements are able to be made. That will not be within the next 7 days, but it will be as soon as possible. I want to thank the Australian Border Force for their professionalism and the work that they've done overnight and the work that they do every day. I send a reminder that when people commit a crime, generally those crimes are dealt with by state enforcement, and the punishment for the crime is the criminal penalty that goes forward. Separate to that, in running an immigration system, we have to have a character test, and we have to decide whether it's reasonable for someone to have a visa in Australia. As Australia's Immigration Minister, I don't have unlimited places for people. And there are many good people who want to come to Australia who don't get visas. When somebody has come and treated Australians in a way that is shown appalling character, their visas do get cancelled, and when their visas are cancelled, they should leave. I am very grateful to the Government of Nauru that we are in a situation now where 3 people, where previously the situation had seemed intractable, are now on a pathway to leave Australia.
So we've got a solution for 3 people. How many of this cohort remain at large in the community?
The situation here is that any country, third country, that issues a visa for them would, it then creates new rights for the government under this Act on removing people. Nauru have described these 3 visas as the first 3, and that's how it should be seen.
Minister, can you explain what about these 3 cases, what's made them first? Are there particular qualifiers or characteristics?
What distinguishes these 3 cases is that they are the 3 that Nauru have chosen to issue visas to. We need to remember Nauru is a sovereign nation, just as for Australia, the Immigration Minister of the day, me, makes decisions about the laws that determine who gets visas to come here. The Government of Nauru determines who gets visas to go there. All 3, though, are violent offenders. One is a murderer.
Picking up violent offenders and murderers obviously isn't the usual step by countries. What did we give Nauru in return for these visas?
There's an arrangement with Nauru, as is the case and has been the case for many, many years. We don't go through the details of the costs involved with that, but let me just say this with respect to the cost. Yes, there's a cost in reaching arrangements with third countries. There is also a cost in the high level of monitoring under Operation Aegis that happens when these individuals are in the community here in Australia. There was also a cost when they were being held in detention. There was a cost before that when they were being held in prison. But no cost has been greater than the cost to the Australian community of their crimes. Right.
You travelled to Nauru recently, and before that you were in Timor-Leste. Are there other countries that are considering this type of arrangement for these people?
Look, I'm not going to go through nation by nation. Obviously, there are people who get deported from Australia every week, and the concept of returns is something that we work with countries with all the time. On this particular arrangement, the only country that has come to us is Nauru, and only because you raised it, because I don't want to set the hairs running, the matter was not discussed at all in Timor-Leste.
With these 3 individuals, was the Government of Nauru, so you mentioned one was a murderer, was the Government of Nauru convinced that they had been adequately rehabilitated? And does this mean that the people, the most violent people, the people at most risk to the community, are still in Australia, and you've not been able to put them behind bars, and by the sounds of it, there's no prospect of you building that case?
These individuals, the Government of Nauru is aware of their background. The Government of Nauru is a sovereign government, and they've made a decision as a sovereign government to issue these visas. Under our character test, they are not eligible for a visa in Australia. Given that visa has been issued, they should leave.
Can you just
I will go behind you. There's been a few attempts behind you.
So you say you anticipate that this will be challenged in the Australian courts.
Everything I do is.
Are you confident that these laws will hold up where the others haven't?
The Parliament took into account every available precedent when we passed these laws. And so, but everything in my portfolio, my portfolio is always, little fun fact, there are more legal cases against the Immigration Minister than any other minister in the Australian government. Always has been, always will be. Lawyers haven't launched anything yet. I simply, whenever I make any decision, presume that there'll be a contest in the courts, and we will go in there in a very strong position as a Commonwealth, dealing exactly with the legislation that the Parliament passed to be able to send people to third countries. Yes.
Minister, there's several cases before the courts now where people are trying to have the same NZYQ kind of principle against their indefinite detention applied to them. What's your view of how this agreement sort of principally address that question of whether people are being indefinitely detained?
Well, certainly, I won't comment on the case that's before the High Court. What I'll say is this. These three individuals are certainly not being indefinitely detained. Certainly not. They're being detained pending removal. We know exactly where they're going, and there is a visa. There are final pieces of logistics that now get organised, but they had to be taken into detention the moment Nauru had issued the visas, because at that moment the visas they were on were cancelled, and under the Immigration Act they became unlawful non-citizens in Australia.
Minister, can I just ask you something on another subject? Peter Dutton today seemed to confirm that the Coalition will withdraw the $300 energy rebate. How long will the government keep it in place?
The thing that I'll say is at every turn, what Peter Dutton has pushed for is higher energy prices. Whenever we've done anything to give energy bill relief, he's voted against it in the Parliament, and he is going to the election proposing the most expensive form of new energy. Everything that Peter Dutton proposes makes cost of living harder. He makes energy prices worse. He makes wages worse. He opposed cheaper TAFE. You can go list after list after list, but effectively, if someone's going ahead, and effectively their theory of Australian households is Peter Dutton says you should have higher prices and lower wages. That's what he's taking to the Australian people.
Just, Minister, Mr Dutton also talked about intervening in insurance markets so consumers aren't ripped off, potentially another market intervention.
Your respect, I've been so much in my portfolio. I haven't spent the morning watching Mr Dutton's interviews. I've got a lot of operational work I'm going here.
Minister, on your portfolio, the government today matched a coalition promise to bar foreign property investment. Is the government also considering matching their promised deep cuts to the immigration intake?
What I'll say on this is a few things. First of all, for Peter Dutton on immigration, don't look at what he says, look at what he does. No Australian immigration minister has issued more visas than Peter Dutton. Australia has only had more than 9 million visas issued twice in Australian history. Both times, Peter Dutton was a relevant minister. Peter Dutton had an opportunity to vote for containing the area of visas that was growing the fastest, student visas. They opposed that legislation. They voted for student visas to be unlimited. And then, on top of all of that, they're saying the visa that had the most integrity issues, the golden ticket visa, the one that worked as cash for visas, is the one they want to bring back. Now, you gave reference to housing. How many houses do you think a cashed-up investor whose only qualification for coming here is they've got cash, how many homes do they end up buying? And they're the ones that Peter Dutton is wanting to favour. So you can talk Peter Dutton can talk all he wants about what he claims he would do with immigration, but he's actually held the portfolio, and everything that he has done is the opposite of what he's saying right now.
Can you just confirm how many...
I'm not avoiding you, I'm just trying to make sure everyone gets a go.
Earlier this year, a UN committee found that the Nauru facility counted as being within Australia's jurisdiction, and they made a specific reference to the financing of it by Australia. What's your view on that in terms of today's announcement?
Nauru is a sovereign nation. Nauru is a sovereign nation and should be treated with respect of a sovereign nation. I'll go here.
Just confirm how many people are in the community as a result of the NZYQ decision.
I'm not providing that right now.
Same question.
Yeah.
What rights will these individuals have when they're resettled in Nauru? Will they be free in the community? Will they be able to get work? living in detention? Like, what's the situation?
Yeah, I've inspected the facilities that they'll be living in on Nauru, and they are individual dwellings, shared kitchen space. They are not contained. They are able to move around the island. The island's not that easy to move around, but from where they will be, it's a relatively short walk to a bus that will allow them to go to the community, and they will be allowed to work in the community.
Minister, how did Nauru come to choose these three? Were they shopping for particular potential visa holders, or did Australia offer these three names?
Look, there have been discussions between my officials and the government of Nauru, and these are the first three visas that have been issued.
So you talked a big
As
game about...
Arts Minister, what do you think of Creative Australia's decision to drop the artist that was representing Australia? There's been a lot of criticism from artists for that.
Yeah, I'll say two things. First of all, I'll say three. First of all, the decision both to retain and then to cease the retention of the work of that artist was a decision made by Creative Australia, not made by me. I always support these decisions being made at arm's length, and I have always supported the actions of the board of Creative Australia. Secondly, though, I will say, so I support that they've made the decision, but it's been made at arm's length from me, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. While there is one work where I made clear the personal reaction I had when I saw one online, I have seen this artist's work over the years, and aside from that work, I will say he is an extraordinary and a gifted artist. I was looking forward, as I think everyone at Creative Australia was, to the work that he'd been commissioned to do at the Venice Biennale. And so I don't want everything that's happened for people to think that we are talking about anyone other than someone who has been producing work of great, extraordinary quality, and a very special work bringing together communities of Western Sydney that he was proposing to do in our pavilion at Venice. But the final thing that I'll say is the work in particular, the one that drew on 9/11, is a work which I hadn't seen. It's some 20 years old. It was on his webpage, and I understand why Creative Australia took the immediate action that they did.
Mr. Burke, just on preventative detention, you talked up, building cases pretty soon after becoming minister.
Yes.
It sounds like you're not going to be able to pursue any. Has that been disappointing for you? And was there a flaw in the legislation, in the government's legislation?
The legislation went to the edge of where constitutional precedent allowed it to go. So that's what the legislation did. But has it been frustrating? Of course it has been. There is nothing more important to this government than community safety. Nothing more important than community safety. And so if I'd been able, under that legislation, to launch actions for preventative detention on a huge scale, I would have jumped at every single opportunity. The way it's been going and the way I've been briefed, there are some lesser orders that are available under that legislation where we might be close to being able to deal with it that way. But the best case outcome is, in fact, not detention. The best case outcome is, if you shouldn't be living in Australia, you leave.
How many can Nauru seriously take, though? Are they considering taking sort of over 100 people?
It's a decision for the government of Nauru.
With respect to the...
Oh, sorry, I was going in between the two. You sorted out between you, and we'll make those two the last two.
With respect to the payments made to Nauru, obviously being one of the third countries that will resettle these individuals, was it, I know you can't give us the exact figure, but was it in the millions, is it billions, is it a lump sum, is it a per visa holder situation? And can you also talk to, you said that there was a cost of keeping them in Australia, of having these preventative measures in place as well. Are we talking about quite a vast difference in terms of this resettlement payment as opposed to that sort of ongoing payment that you would need to make if you couldn't resettle them?
Yeah, look, I won't go further than I went to Charles's earlier question, and just to reaffirm, the greatest cost is the cost that was incurred to the Australian community through their crimes.
The facilities that you inspected on Nauru, what is that capacity? What is the capacity of those facilities?
Oh, there are a number. There are a number of similar facilities side by side. I went to one of them. So in terms of what's the full capacity that might be available, it would be larger than the individual dwellings that I visited.
So can I stick one more in? It's just on comments that Peter Dutton made last week just regarding potential changes to dual citizenship stripping laws. Is that something the government would consider as well, or what do you make of those comments?
I make of those comments, I wish just for balance there could be a question on what Peter Dutton said where I didn't go straight to hypocrisy. But it happens with all of them. He effectively ran that argument to cover for the fact that the person he was objecting to became a citizen when he was in government. Thank you.